Who is Prince Whipple and why is his story important today? Hi, I'm Jason, welcome to Founder of the Day, and today we're talking about Prince Whipple. Now, Prince was a young man who grew up in northern Africa, probably Ghana. The early days of his life were very hard to track and information is sparse, but what we do know is that his parents were moderately wealthy and they sent him over to the Americas to further his education. Unfortunately, like often happened at the time, when you were on the high seas, the captain of the ship was dictator of that ship. And Prince's ship had a captain who decided, instead of accepting money to transport him over to America and get an education, he accepted the money and then took Prince, who was about 13 at the time, and sold him into slavery. Real tragic, not a great start to this story, but Prince gets a little bit lucky at this point. And now I know the first thing you think is, how can a dude who got captured and sold into slavery have any luck at all? The reason he was lucky is while most of the slaves who were brought to Baltimore like he was and sold into slavery, most of those people went to the South and onto plantations where things were not super great. Prince, on the other hand, was purchased by William Whipple of Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Now, I am not trying to be an apologist for slavery by any means. Ugh, gross. Slavery's the worst. That is not what I'm trying to say. What I am trying to say is, slavery in New England, particularly in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, was a lot different than we think of it today. For example, when William brought Prince back to his house, Prince was his only slave for most of his life. As far as I understand, his only slave his whole life, although in later years that may or may not have changed. And the reason someone like William would have purchased a slave in the first place, first of all, they called them servants. I know that doesn't make a big difference. It is what it is. But it is important so that you can understand the attitude that people had to their slaves at the time in New England. And the way William and most of his contemporaries would have viewed their servants was the same way they viewed women, which is like children who needed to be taken care of. Again, I am not promoting this in any fashion. We've come a long way since those days. This was just the view at the time. The reason the Prince was so lucky to fall into William's household is he basically became an assistant. William had a young, growing mercantile house where he would purchase goods that came in on ships and sell them to the citizens of New Hampshire, and he would purchase goods from the citizens of New Hampshire and sell them to the ship captains to bring around the world. I know it sounds like he was a middleman, but at the time merchants were a very important part of the community because that's how money was brought into the country and that's how goods were sold and people living here made a profit. And the relationship between Prince and William was that Prince lived in William's house. He was there every day. They'd get up together, they'd go to work together, they'd do the counting, okay, this just came off this ship, let's add it up, and then sell it off, and they grew together. And, William did, not only feed Prince, but educated him in mathematics and language because he wanted a smart assistant who could really help him grow the business. Now, of course, when the American Revolution broke out, everyone, merchants in particular, were up in arms because these new taxes affected them the worst. You look at John Hancock is a famous example of a merchant who was not happy with what was going on. And then, so William and Prince, William especially, ended up going down to Philadelphia as a Continental Congressman. And while he was there, he signed something called the Declaration of Independence, which was pretty sweet for him to get his name on that document. What is interesting is Prince went with him. And while none of the servants would have been in the Independence Hall during the Continental Congress, they would have been waiting outside. And they would have been in the meal halls and taverns and inns around Philadelphia, where the founding fathers, as we know them standardly, were speaking words of liberty and independence and of natural rights. And Prince would have been in the room and heard these conversations. Furthermore, William was a major general in the New Hampshire militia, and he, along with Prince, would serve at the around Saratoga during the famous battles in upstate New York. And what's interesting is what the major generals would do is they would send their aides de camp out to the people around the battlefield. They would watch from afar and send people around. Go do this, tell them to move here, tell them to move here. And Prince would have been standing next to William, overseeing the operation, which is a major important part. Again, he was forced to do this, which makes it inanely against his will whether or not he wanted to be there. But his service was extraordinarily important. After they signed the Declaration of Independence, Prince and William went together back to New Hampshire, to the Moffat Ladd House, as is now known and still stands, where the house that William owned, and they planted a liberty tree together, and that liberty tree still stands to this day. Now, again, having a slave plant a liberty tree for you sounds pretty terrible, but don't click away just yet, because the story is not over. As the Revolution went on, New Hampshire treated black people very justly, especially the free black people. But what happened was Prince ended up marrying a woman, a free woman, and William was more than 100% likely had to give permission for this to happen. But what we know about the relationship seems that William would have been like, yeah, of course you can get married. And the reason I say it so easily is just a year after the war ends, William grants Prince the rights of a free man. Now, he doesn't make him a free man. He grants him the rights of a free man. This is an important distinction, but probably for the opposite reason you would automatically assume. When he's not just saying, you can act like a free man, but you're still my slave. Actually, if he just granted him the rights of a free man, there were people out there, even in New Hampshire, who would just kidnap black people and sell them into slavery. But if he had the rights of a free man, but was still technically William Whipple's property, there was less of a chance he would be kidnapped, because these super racist kidnappers selling people into slavery are not good dudes, but they were more afraid of a wealthy white man who would come after him for stealing his property than they were of a free black man. So it's actually a good way to go about it. Now, during this time, Prince was one of 20 people to sign a petition to the New Hampshire government demanding that they outlaw slavery. And when you read this petition and the words of liberty and the fluent language that's in there, most historians believe that it would have been Prince Whipple who had the education and understanding and experience in Philadelphia to have actually written that document. Unfortunately, it did not get passed. You know, New Hampshire was coming out of a revolution and there was a lot of organizing going on, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for them. It just kind of fell by the wayside. But it's important that not only William, but 20 other slave owners in Portsmouth and in New Hampshire permitted their slaves to, petition for your freedom. You deserve it. We're fighting for liberty. And 3 years after that, William actually did sign over Prince's papers and signed him his freedom. And what happened is that Prince kept working for William for the remainder of his life, because first of all, he looked at him as a father figure who had educated him in the ways of, not just the ways of freedom, but like mathematics and how to run a business. He let him marry. They built a house down the street. And they were family. And that is, again, how most slave owners in people, say Massachusetts and New Hampshire and that part of the country, viewed their slaves. Like I said, usually as children, but throughout the Revolution, attitudes changed. And that brings me to why I think this story is so important right now. And I've said before, I don't like to talk about modern politics on this channel. It's touchy, and I try and be as objective as possible, and giving my personal opinion and things like that will make people mad at me, and I'm not really here for clickbait. I'd rather get less people watching for the right reasons than tons of people watching for the wrong ones. But nowadays, every once in a while, you hear someone saying, and you hear it a lot in like grade school and high school, like, how could someone like William sign a document that said all men are created equal and still own slaves? It's a great question. It's one of the most difficult questions to answer throughout American history. And my little bit of 2 cents is, William had to sign a document that said all men are created equal because someone had to say it. William, in order to make his way in society and make a positive change, to do something like get rid of slavery, you had to not only become a part of that society, you had to excel in it. And I'll use an example for today, say climate change. I'm not saying I'm for or against it. I'm just saying, as an example, people who might be, think climate change is a problem. Well, it's really hard for the everyday common person like you and me to make a change to impact climate change or blah 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 or whatever cause you might be interested in. But people who make a good amount of money and make their way up the political chain, they can effect positive change. And when William, all the way back as a younger man, purchased Prince in the first place, he was trying to become part of that society. And then once that society, he was in that society and he grew this successful business, and then the revolution begins and they sign the Declaration, he was able to use his position not only to free Prince but to push his state forward on liberating all their slaves. And I think when we look at the relationship between Prince and William, I think it's the type of positive story where, we still have some racial unhappiness today, and it's terrible, and everyone in the world, I guess not everyone, 99.999% of Americans wish it wasn't there. And these are the type of stories that can at least help guide us in the right direction. It's about working together. It's about those who, with the opportunity, who can help people who don't have the opportunity. It's about people who don't have the opportunity taking advantage of those who are willing to help them. Prince Whipple and William Whipple are 2 of my personal favorite founders. Their stories, the way they interweave, the way they work together, the way they planted a liberty tree while one wealthy white man declared his independence, and they set off in a direction to help also bring the enslaved black man his independence. I think we can learn a lot from that story. So I hope you enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. This video apparently is a little longer than the other ones I've put out, but it's a great story and I'm really into it. We'll be back tomorrow with another Founding Father.